This session is pretty much a huge Q&A for our panel here. So if you do have any questions after the introductions, you are open to hop in and ask our panel the questions that you may have. So to start off, we'll start off with the introductions here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ella McDougall. I'm really excited to be here today. Just a little background on myself as a panelist. I grew up on the East Coast studying marine science and radioactive chemistry in the Delaware Bay, looking at cycling in estuaries. And then after I graduated, I went to Peru to serve as a Peace Corps volunteer in the environmental program from 2015 to 2017. I planted a lot of trees, I taught some English, and I played a lot of soccer with a girls team that I started in my community. And then I made a really big pivot to studying climate change and coastal policy. And I went to graduate school at the Middlebury Institute in Monterey. And I focused on sea level rise and the policies around protecting communities and encouraging community resilience. And I also focused a lot on equity. And during my time in grad school, I started working at the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy as an intern. And that was how I first learned about this wonderful organization and California Wildlife Day. So I'm excited to be here today. During grad school, I also worked a lot on marine plastic pollution, both in the San Francisco Bay and microplastics, and globally looking at the equity impacts of marine plastic pollution. I worked as a climate analyst for the city of Santa Cruz, which was where I got a lot of my sea level rise policy experience. And then I spent a year as a Sea Grant Fellow for the State Coastal Conservancy working on the Climate Ready Grant Program, which funds sea level rise resiliency projects and lots of other projects. And I also spent a while working for the Central Coast Climate Collaborative, which is a group of people who work on climate change issues in the Central Coast.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. So let me introduce myself. I am Richard Castillo, and I am originally from La Fortuna, Costa Rica, where I grew up. And I grew up there and worked as a naturalist guide for about 10 years. I also studied law at the University in Costa Rica, at the University of Costa Rica, UCR is the acronym. And I am based in Monterey. I moved to Monterey, California in 2018 to study a master's degree in international environmental policy, which I finished in 2020. So I have a concentration in ocean and coastal resource management, and I am interested and have worked in the intersection of human rights, marine governance, and sustainable economic development. I volunteer at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which I hope will be open again very soon. So love to see you around once it is open. And I became familiar and learned about the natural wildlife, particularly the marine wildlife of the Monterey Bay area, which is really diverse and interesting. Also a beautiful area. I am an outdoors person. As I mentioned, I was a tour guide and I grew up in Costa Rica. So I'm very happy here in Monterey, California. And I normally go kayaking and hiking and sometimes swimming in the ocean when the air is not too cold. So I'm more like a tropical person. However, a good wetsuit can fix the cold of Monterey and allow me to jump in the water. I'm a Spanish native speaker, so hola, ¿cómo están todos los que hablan español? Gracias por estar acá. Un saludo. And I am a coffee drinker. As part of the Costa Rican culture, I drink coffee probably since I was a little kid, not even gonna say the age. But yes, I'm a coffee drinker, so anytime I'm happy to join anyone to have a chat in Spanish in a coffee cup or a hike. So thanks so much again.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard.
Hello, welcome. My name is Sarah Farola. I am really happy to be here. Such a cool opportunity to talk about the wild world of work and climate change. I first got involved with the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy after I graduated from college. I met Marie, and it really informed my view of watersheds in a whole different way and how to conserve them. I was born and raised on Kauai, where I am currently located. And I have had a lot of experience with the water and oceans and mountains and just really enjoying all of the fun recreation and interesting life and just like above from plants and wildlife. And I really got interested in learning more about how to conserve this native land we live in. After I got my degree from UCSC in earth science, I kind of went on a journey to figure out how that looked, how conservation looked in action and from a career angle. And I first had experience working in groundwater research, where I helped out with managed aquifer recharge projects, which is basically filtering out groundwater, or excuse me, surface water from agriculture fields before it went into groundwater. Then I worked in geologic consulting, and now I'm in the natural resource management and planning world, and I'm trying to get involved with doing those sorts of projects on Kauai because there's huge flooding issues. There's a little picture in my slide, the bottom left corner of a major river, Honolulu River, and on the right-hand side is the floodplain is completely inundated, which is where the majority of agriculture as well as community development is. So that's sort of what I'm focusing on now. The picture on the right is a watershed on Kauai, which the Hawaiian word for it is ahupua'a. And it's basically trying to approach managing the water resources as one from the ocean to the top of the mountain. And that's me in the middle doing pulling out some instruments from groundwater research. So happy to be here with you all today, and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa Barbeau. I got my BA in political science and Africana studies at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. And then I went on to serve in the Peace Corps in South Africa. I was in the Venda region, which is right by the northernmost border to Zimbabwe. And then I was evacuated about a year from yesterday due to the pandemic. And South Africa in particular has been really hit hard by climate change since it's a semi-arid to arid country and an incredibly water vulnerable region. So after my evacuation, I kind of switched gears and focused my studies towards natural resource management. And I'm now a current student at the Middlebury Institute for International Studies, focusing on freshwater management and conservation. And I recently become involved with the Carmel River Watershed Association, where I'm continuing my work looking at conservation through watersheds and specifically looking into clean water and sanitation access to those in vulnerable communities. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Cool. Thanks, Tessa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cristian Hernandez, and currently I am the bilingual education program coordinator for the Ventana Wildlife Society. I earned my bachelor's in science, bachelor's in marine science from California State University, Monterey Bay, and I actually had a minor in pre-law. And I have a pretty funny story about how I got here, but my favorite movie is Legally Blonde. And if you aren't familiar, the protagonist suddenly decides one day that they want to pursue a law degree in at Harvard. And so that's exactly what I did. But then one fateful summer job changed my life entirely. And I took a summer camp counselor job with Ventana Wildlife Society. And since then, everything has changed for me. I'm here speaking about how I believe youth play a huge role in combating climate change. And my position allows me to provide youth equitable access to outdoor spaces and really allows me to be the first step in their climate journey by inspiring a connection with nature. So I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian. And thank you everybody else on the panel for a wonderful introduction. Now, we do have a couple questions that we planned out here, but then we also encourage the audience to bring their own questions for this panel as well, okay? So this first question off is for anybody who would like to answer, and this is, how does your career connect to climate?
I can speak to that one.
All right.
Thanks, Joseph. So I work in what can sometimes be described as the black box of environmental consulting, sort of like, what do you really do? So right now my work is involved, and I'm still learning a lot about that too, but the primary focus right now is working with local governments to sort of address these big issues along climate change. And one of the focuses right now is flood management. And that's a really hot topic and hard to sort of think about the best ways forward with these really dramatic climatic events. But we're trying to put our heads together, and we work in a pretty solid team of people with different backgrounds, whether it's watershed or programmatic permitting, which you need to push projects forward in the construction realm. We work with the California Environmental Quality Act, which aims to reduce the impacts of development, even if it's positive development for something like flood management. So yeah, that's sort of, it's doing the thinking to project ourselves into the future of how we might make decisions now that are innovative and creative and different than how we've managed something like infrastructure in the past. So that's a little bit. Thank you.
I can jump in and kind of bounce off of Sarah's perspective of governments in the beginning. For the past year or so, I've been working at the state government level, helping prepare communities for the impacts of sea level rise and other climate change impacts, but I've kind of been specializing in sea level rise. And it's been a really interesting journey to kind of look at best available science and then the policies that the lawmakers and the regulators are putting forward, and try to match it with some funding sources to help communities start to prepare their local resources for climate change. And that kind of looks like, well, we see that, you know, your beaches might be flooding in about 30 years, and that includes this access way, this public trail, or this wastewater system. And so how can we get funding to this community so that they can either move that material back or maybe protect it? And what are the trade-offs for each of those options? And so it's a lot of incorporating science and policy together and then funneling into the communities that are vulnerable the money that they need and the help that they need to put these projects forward. But a lot of it also intersects with equity right now. And we know that climate change carries a really unequal burden on communities that have been historically disadvantaged. And I'm sure Tessa and I both can speak to that from our Peace Corps experiences. It is a really heavy burden for underdeveloped communities to carry. But in California, we are looking, you know, at where communities, maybe they haven't really considered climate change yet. They're just trying to figure out how to keep clean water. And so making sure that we kind of pinpoint those communities so that they get the funding and they get the help and the assistance and the best advice that they can get. That's kind of been the role that I've been working with in climate change most recently.
Great,
I'll jump in next. So in my particular career focus is related to water and clean water access, as well as access to sanitation methods. And it's currently estimated that roughly 970 million people, roughly 11% of the world's population, lives without access to clean water. And then roughly 25% of the world's population, which is 1.8 billion people, live without adequate access to sanitation, which obviously has been exposed and highlighted even more throughout the past year of the pandemic. So as the new UN Sustainable Development Goals roll out for 2030, a lot of them are going to be focused heavily around clean water and sanitation. And clean water is particularly a fleeting resource as our climate is becoming hotter and places are growing drier. And as water and politics are heavily intertwined in many of these places, that's kind of where my career path in natural resource program management is kind of coming together. And especially because I see it in the community I live in here in Monterey. We have limited access to clean water, and it's just something I saw in my community when I was in South Africa. So it's really affecting people on the global scale and then right here in our own communities.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. I want to move on to question 2 now, and that's, how did the pandemic impact your career choices and path? And I know, Tessa, you did touch up on this a little bit, but if anybody else wants to hop in, or Tessa, you want to elaborate a little bit more, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'll go a little further. So actually a year ago yesterday, I was evacuated rather suddenly from South Africa due to the pandemic. And this was an incredibly difficult thing, as I had spent the last 9 months living in a community, learning the language of Chivenda, and I was a primary school teacher teaching English. And so it was very difficult to leave my community within like an hour's notice. But what was also most challenging is the community I was living in had recently endured heavy flooding due to, changing climate, something that's become more and more common in Southern Africa within the past decade. And due to that, we had a mudslide in our village, and my family had been without water and electricity for the past 3 months. And since we didn't have water, electricity, we would have to travel to get it. And then we also didn't have access to, boil it and clean it. And a lot of the water in the community is heavily contaminated from mines. And so as we were, leaving South Africa and borders were closing, I felt a lot of turmoil because we didn't really know much about the pandemic. And the last thing we really had to compare it to was the Spanish influenza, which had ravaged South Africa. And in 6 weeks, it had taken out 6% of the population, 300,000 people had died. And South Africa has a community that has high HIV prevalence and a very large population of elderly people. So to leave this community and not know what the fate of the country or the world was going to be during the pandemic really inspired me to kind of make that career change and go into this clean water and sanitation field. So that's what I have.
I can also address this question. As I mentioned earlier, I am an outdoor education teacher. So I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. So that has completely changed under current circumstances. I'm very used to having programs with youth, various ranges from 4 to 18. And we sort of go around the county and we load up in our 13 passenger vans, and we, take field trips to the beach. I interpret like the natural world around us and inspire youth to connect with nature. And everything changed completely. And so we've switched over to an online platform. And so this Zoom call right now feels very familiar. And it actually looks exactly like this, where it's me talking and everyone is hopefully listening. And I have a PowerPoint presentation with the intent and drive to still get kids connected with outdoor spaces following county guidelines. So it's been very interesting and challenging, but there have been some great successes, and there have been some really great aha and moments and instances where kids, unmute themselves and ask a question or answer or share what they've experienced in their own backyard. And so it's been challenging, but still somewhat rewarding and, very awe-inspiring.
Great, thanks, Cristian. And then also, Sarah, I noticed here that you had a couple notes for this question as well. Do you want to take a stab at it?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Joseph. I think that it's important to highlight when we're in our careers, the times that we don't have jobs, because then we really heavily rely on our community and our sort of creativity and grit to get a job. So when the pandemic happened, I had just moved back to Santa Cruz and I was really networking and trying to get a job in natural resource management because it was my own sort of career pivot. I had been focused on water, focused on geology, and I wanted to try and broaden the impact and be a little more directly involved in the planning side. And so I was really close to getting a job. I had an interview with the hiring director of the company that I currently work in. And it was the day after the shutdown happened for Santa Cruz County. And so it just was put on hold and I was disappointed. But as everyone was during that time, it was just kind of, you had to deal with it. And so I, just kept kind of like monthly email connecting with the company because I knew that there was a need, even though it wasn't happening right now. And I connected, I remember talking with Marie and just people doing the interesting type of work in my community and the people I had graduated with for any sorts of geology jobs. And I got a lot of great support and it just kind of forced me to really call on my resources and be like disciplined with reaching out to people and just cold emailing people and just saying, hey, I have this background, I have this passion for this work. And even though a lot of places weren't hiring and it was completely understandable, it taught me that skill and persistence. And then it paid off. About halfway through, I got hired on with this job that I'm currently at, first as a contract worker and then as a full-time employee. So just persistence is key, I think, and things happen and they affect the whole world, or maybe they affect just you. So keep up trying and it'll all work out, hopefully. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. We have a question in the chat here from Catherine. Which organizations, national or international, are doing the most for flood control and water management? And for students wanting to pursue careers in those fields, who's available or who's there as resources?
I can speak to the national. This is still something that I'm learning about and getting into a lot more since moving back to Kauai and learning about how the state functions here. It's a lot different than California. California is pretty unique in how progressive it is in terms of water resource management, or at least it's gaining that momentum. The first things that come to my mind are the FEMA. They do a lot of flood control and hazard, like emergency hazard funding and projects, and that's going to be on the federal level. So that's like an option if you want to do like a large scale agency that is the go-to for like local and state governments. And also the Army Corps of Engineers does a lot of levee work, and they also do watershed management plans. That's and they're located throughout every state, and you kind of contact them and get involved. They do the permitting too. Sorry, this is like all like I'm kind of thinking about it because it's a really good question. In terms of on like a smaller nonprofit level, I think communities sort of band together and create initiatives. And that's something that you kind of need to look for based on where you want to work. So for example, on Kauai, there's a nonprofit called the Hanalei Watershed Hui, and they sort of do the community coordination and outreach, and then hire or contract out specialists to do like they did a watershed management plan, they're doing a flood risk plan, and they coordinate with the local government. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Thank you.
I can offer a little bit of, so I don't know a ton about flood management, but I work a lot in coastal flooding, and in California specifically, a lot of state agencies will try to encourage communities to kind of lead their own projects, just like Sarah was saying. And that was one of the grant programs that I was working for the State Coastal Conservancy. But we focus a lot on the nature-based solutions for flood management. And so that's a lot of like living shorelines or wetland-based flood storage projects like that. And they are a really great way to kind of keep the shoreline of California natural. But the downside is that they're kind of expensive, and their final outcomes are a little less known, and they're very specific to the geography and the area where they're being installed or implemented. So that's kind of the nature-based side of coastal flood management.
Great, thank you. Our third question we have is, why are you dedicating your work to climate resiliency environment, and what drives you?
I can start with that one if you allow me to do so. Yeah, so thanks for your question. So as I mentioned in my bio, I grew up in Costa Rica. So, you know, Costa Rica is known internationally for the different environmental policies that are in place that allow not only the conservation of the natural resources, but also the economic development. So, and I grew up in a touristy town in La Fortuna. So I remember when I was a younger person, I was interested of learning learning about the policies that made it possible. Like, what type of policies do we have in place that make possible having national parks, plus having tourists, plus having a successful industry, which is the tourism industry in Costa Rica, which is currently, or at least before the pandemic, was the main economic activity in the country, which is, if it's well managed, can work in three different ways. It can allow sustainability and conservation of the natural resources, can allow the economic development, and can allow social equity. It is not perfect, but in Costa Rica is working pretty good. So I remember I wanted to learn about the policies, the environmental law, which is what I was passionate about when I was younger, and it's why I wanted to go to a law program. So that's basically what made me go to study law and not directly biology or something, to learn more about the policies. And yeah, I decided then to study international environmental policy here in Middlebury. So yes, basically what drives me to work in conservation and in policy is my experience in Costa Rica, growing up in an area where the different environmental policies allow the conservation, as I mentioned, the economic development, and the social equity, and my concentration in ocean and coastal resource management here at Middlebury Institute was mostly because even though in Costa Rica we're doing a good job in the conservation of the land, like land-based national parks, the rainforest, watersheds, and others. Again, it's not perfect, but it's good. So even though we're doing a good job in the land, the oceans are not very well managed. So that's also what drove me to start researching and learning more about the policies that can help Costa Rica achieve a higher level of marine conservation in terms of management of fisheries, of coastal habitats, and also the huge marine space we have in Costa Rica, that the marine space in Costa Rica is 11 times bigger than the land space. So that's a really big challenge in terms of management and monitoring and enforcement. So that's So I don't want to go on and on. So basically, my experience growing up in Costa Rica and the policies that we have is what motivated me to study environmental policy. And I keep learning every day and keep finding new ways to improve the policies that we have or implement Costa Rican policies here in California or somewhere else, or policies from California and Costa Rica. And the interesting part of this is that you can always take ideas from somewhere else and implement them in your projects and in different countries or in the communities, or even in your educational experiences.
That's really interesting. I can jump in and offer my perspective, which was from my international experience as a Peace Corps volunteer. And Tessa mentioned that her service was interrupted with a evacuation, and my service was not interrupted, but there was a really devastating climate change event that occurred in Peru during my service that sent the rest of the country home. And I stayed because I was in a safe area. And basically what happened was it was an El Nino year, and there was an incredible amount of rain that happened on the coast of Peru. And if anyone's ever been to Peru, it's fairly desert. It's a lot of like arid landscapes. And so if you add a ton of water, it's going to cause a lot of mudslides and landslides, and the water doesn't necessarily get absorbed anywhere. And so it caused this insane amount of flooding on the coast, and it took out the entire, basically the national system, the national infrastructure. Roads were completely impassable. All of electricity and water was all taken out by this flooding. And so I could see firsthand what the impacts of like a climate change disaster could do to a not just a community, but an entire country. And prior to my Peace Corps experience, I had been kind of a scientist, and I was, you know, I wanted some international experience, but I was thinking I would go home and continue to, you know, focus on science. But seeing the impacts of my my host family and their extended families who were living on the coast, and all of the communities that we were connected to, all of my fellow volunteers who got evacuated under these like really unprecedented situations, made me realize that climate change was like here, and it was knocking on our door, and it was causing just mass chaos in this undeveloped area. And so it made me think how climate change can impact a community that is not prepared well, and I could see it firsthand. And so I thought, how can I shift my career to help these communities that are especially vulnerable to these impacts? And so that's kind of why I launched into a career that focuses on the impacts of climate change and how to prepare communities and how to ensure that they're resilient to what's going to happen, and making sure that they know what can happen to their community, what's vulnerable, what's the best way to mitigate the impacts or adapt to those impacts that they're expecting. And it was a really, you know, it was a hard time to kind of watch it. You never want to like see a disaster happen. But it certainly was an eye-opening experience. And that's kind of why I started down this career path today.
Thank you, Ella. I share similar feelings and sentiments about communities, and my experience with climate change really revolves around our local community here in the Monterey County. I remember early on as an outdoor educator working with youth and taking them out to the ocean and finding out that many of these kids, while they live only miles away from the ocean, have never set foot on our beaches. And what really drives my climate, working in the field of climate change through education is really this hope, and this hope that as an educator, taking these kids outside who, regardless of socioeconomic, circumstances that may surround their at-home lives, taking them out to the ocean and having them experience, holding a sand crab for the very first time. And, many of these students may be upwards ages of like 17 to 18. So these are fairly kids can come from a a diverse background, right? It's not just the younger students, and hoping that them holding the sand crab really forms a connection that is going to last and carry through their whole entire life. And, you know, my hope for this is that through the work that I do, that, you know, they're going to remember this sand crab and then make that connection to our, you know, our sea level is rising, and, you know, hopefully continue this journey of being the next generation climate leaders and making those decisions that best can reflect and protect our ocean and combat climate change.
Great, thank you guys. We have a question from the chat here. I think it's pretty long here, but Michael, I'm going to go ahead and try to paraphrase it and correct me if I'm wrong here. He's asking, are there any organizations that you're aware of that streamline regulations so that property owners can reduce fuel load on their property to both reduce the risk of loss of life and property, but also at the same time create healthier natural lands? And he also mentions that there's other regulations that stand in the way for people to know how they can, you know, remove dead and diseased trees and thick and flammable bushes. Is there anybody helping to reduce the regulations so that this can be done?
I can talk to this a little bit. I actually am located in North Lake Tahoe, so I've been working a little bit on wildfire resiliency up here. And there is an initiative to kind of connect a lot of the organizations and a lot of the different, you know, in wildfire resiliency, there are so many different players. There's like forest management, there's moving fuel, there's using the fuel for energy, there's end markets for wood products. And I know one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to go around the policy and just start putting pilot projects on the ground. And it's looking a lot like connecting community-based organizations with some innovators and some business folks, and just coming up with creative solutions and seeing what works. And so I don't necessarily know, you know, it's very specific by region and jurisdiction, I think, but there are some interesting projects that are coming forth in terms of like how to, you know, how to move lumber and how to produce energy from scrap. And there's just, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation coming down the pipes pretty soon. So I don't know yet, but I think that there's a lot of ideas and innovation that are happening.
I don't know who is familiar with this initiative, but I understand that well, years ago or hundreds of years ago, indigenous groups in California used to start controlled fires to little by little burn the amount of fuels accumulated on the ground. And I understood, if I understood correctly, that they are being allowed to little by little start that practice again, or who is familiar with that, with the indigenous practice of removing fuel?
Yeah, you're definitely right, Richard. Part of the programs that I'm mentioning in terms that are like bolstering different, you know, pilot projects, a lot of them are going back to the native land management ways and low grade fires to clear out excess brush and thin the forest essentially. And they always say a healthy forest is one that you can gallop a horse through. And so many of our forests have been just, you know, the burn ban, and I don't want to mess up those words. There's been a burn ban for so long that our forests aren't healthy anymore, and we need to bring that back. And honestly, it's Native Americans who know how to do it best. So we really need to learn from them.
So maybe if Michael leaves his email contact, so his email in the chat, and we can find out which organization is working in that and then help him connect with them. So they may provide some better ideas regarding controlled fires or ways not to do it, very important, and ways to possibly do it with the permits, of course.
Yeah, that's definitely a couple of loaded questions there. And I noticed that Michael did put his email in the chat. So if you guys want to grab that and get back to him. But as far as our other questions that we have scheduled, number 4 is, what was your favorite part of your program of study? And this can be to anybody on the panel.
I can hop in on this one just because we were recently talking about Indigenous practices. That has been really my favorite thing that I've learned so far through my studies of natural resource policy management is Indigenous techniques and the ways that people have been living off the land and sustainably taking care of the land and having the land take care of them in return. And in many ways, the climate change field is new and growing, but in a lot of ways, techniques and practices have been around for centuries. And if we adopt those and kind of implement them into our climate change resiliency practices and protocols, I think that is really the way forward. And that's been pretty much my favorite part.
Great, thanks, Tessa. And anybody else?
I would like to go on the question. So let me say the question again so the audience are informed of what we're talking about. So this is what the favorite part of your program or of study. So again, I went to Middlebury Institute to International Environmental Policy program. And my favorite part of the program was the multiculturality. So regardless of the classes, which I also enjoyed, the best part of Middlebury was the multicultural perspective, having classmates and professors from all over the world, bringing their different ideas and perspective. And yeah, I think that's amazing. Also, the ability to interact in the multiple languages is also a unique experience that I had in the program of my program of studies. And I don't remember if Ella was still my classmate in that time or not, but I remember once we had, for our Professor Langholz, one of the classes, we formed a group, and he came. It was so multicultural and diverse that the professor came and asked her, how many languages are there in this group? And there were like 8 languages in a group of like 4 people. So I think that's unique and that's amazing, and it'll be really hard to find somewhere else. So hopefully it will become and the new normal, the multiculturality and the diversity, and we'll be able to find it not only in school, but also in the organizations we will work at and our projects we will be implementing. And yeah, that will make the project way more successful, I think.
I can give a quick example if we have time. My favorite part of my program in earth science was, as sort of our big final project, we spent 5 weeks living in the Eastern Sierra Nevada, doing like a big geologic mapping project. And for me, it was the first time that I had really been able to take what I'd learned in the classroom and like just observe the landscape and not have the pressure of, you know, reading something, writing something, taking a test on it, but kind of in like a more relaxed in some way environment, just kind of observe my surroundings. And I think that this is the foundation of science and the foundation of indigenous knowledge of the land, is to really just like stop and look at it and not take from it, but sort of just try to see the patterns that arise. And this is a big part of why I want to work in natural resource management, is to sort of be a part of the shift that's happening of changing how we have interacted with the land in the past 100 to 200 years, and be a little more innovative in how we come up with solutions for moving forward based on like this deep-seated knowledge from generations past, and also just kind of stopping to look at what's happening now. And for example, where I am on Kauai, there's just a huge mudslide that took out a road to 2 communities, and there's 1 road on the entire island. So it's a sort of a really big deal. And it's interesting from a geologic perspective because mudslides are a result of extreme flooding and also wildfires. And they're sort of hard problems to tackle because they're random, and this is a part of the road that had a retention wall on it. So just sort of like figuring out how we might address these events that happen, and looking at them in ways that we haven't before. So that's all. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Was there anything, and this is directed at everybody on the panel, by the way, was there anything that was surprising, like a surprising twist or turn in your career that you might, you think is significant to mention? And then also, how did you handle that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. As I mentioned in my introduction, I wanted to be a lawyer. I went to school, I went to CSUMB with every intention to be a scientist. And I had one fateful internship where I had to wake up really early, and I decided maybe doing research isn't for me. And so I found, a lot of power within my voice and being able to stand up for communities that may not be able to represent themselves. And so I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, and that was the plan. And I followed through with that until, again, that summer when I graduated, I, was looking for something to do, and I took a summer camp job with the Ventana Wildlife Society. And I completely fell in love with the work I was doing. And I fell in love with, how like meaningful my interactions with youth, again, ranging from anywhere from 4 to like 18 within the county, really sort of inspired them to connect with the outdoor setting and to like conserve and protect nature. And it was those moments that really meant something to me at that time and still do. And so since then, I've been proud of the work that I do in outdoor education. And I have the very fun pleasure of taking kids into places in nature at local parks that they may not otherwise have access to or have an outlet to go, and experience. And it has been some of the most fulfilling work that I've done. And so as of now, that's the plan, but who knows, maybe one day I'll decide to go back and pursue that law degree. But yeah, that was my big twist.
Awesome, thanks, Christian. Was there anybody else that wanted to answer this question?
I can respond to that. I resonate with the research is not for me side of that. So thank you, Christian. I think that a surprising twist for me was realizing that there are other careers related to science and conservation that aren't necessarily being a biologist or a conservationist in its pure form. And when I was doing the groundwater research work through UC Santa Cruz, the person who did the coordinating with different landowners and community members, sort of the stakeholder engagement, and kind of granted the permissions for these interesting science and conservation projects to go forward, was something that I had no idea existed as a job. So, and that sort of like helped me pivot in that direction of learning more about what environmental planning and management looked like. And it's a big, big issue, and it's complicated and it's hard, but I realized that it was a job available to me, and also that I could use my sort of passion for communicating and establishing common ground with people and working together to solve these problems in a way that used science and also used more of like a management angle instead of like just scientific research or going into just other conservation realms that were a little bit, I guess, focused on what we're taught in school. So it also inspired me to like do things like this and figure out how to go into schools and just the community to show that this is a type of work that you can go into and you don't need to wait until you're in your mid-20s or in college to realize that. So thank you.
Right. And you guys are all relatively young in as far as being a professional. Do you guys have 5-year plans as far as, to progress in your career?
Yeah, I can jump in. My 5-year plan, although I love the coastline and I'm very passionate about our beaches, coastal zone, the Carmel River watershed especially, I am trying to become a bit more of a climate generalist and pivot away from just focusing on sea level rise, although I think it's really important. I mentioned that I now am trying to dip my toes into the wildfire resilience side of climate change, broaden the scope away from just beaches and coastal communities to all sorts of communities that are impacted by all climate impacts, and that's a lot of like high heat, wildfire, landslides, mudslides, just chronic flooding, drought, and so that's kind of my 5-year plan, is to be able to become more of a climate generalist rather than a specialist in sea level rise. And I don't know what that looks like, honestly, but that's kind of my broad plan.
Cool. Yeah. Now, is there a way that any of you guys would measure personal success? Because I know there's a lot of, in society, there's ways that people measure that based on certain accomplishments. But do you guys have differentiating viewpoints on that?
I can go first if you allow me to do so. So I measure personal success professionally and academically based on how much I have learned in a certain amount of time. So if I can look back to the last year and bullet point a few skills or topics that I learned in the past year, to me that's success. So regardless, we are always learning and reflecting on that. I think is very important. So as long as I can reflect and highlight a few skills and topics that I learned, I think I'm succeeding. That's how I know I'm succeeding.
I can go next. As an outdoor educator doing this whole platform online via Zoom, it has been a little challenging to measure success with youth. But really, it's still the same, and I still feel the same sense of success and empowerment as I would in the field. It just looks a little different. And so now, whenever I have students who unmute themselves or turn on their camera for the first time in about the whole entire year that we've been working together, and they share just one action that they're going to implement in their routines that may reduce their carbon footprint, or draw some sort of connection between their homes and what we're talking about regarding climate change, like that, those moments right there are the things that really propel me and allow me to feel this sense of like I'm doing what I want to do, and that I am being successful in this career. And so really, these small little bursts that let me know that the kids are retaining the information and drawing those connections, really is how I measure my personal success in the field of like outdoor education, and tying that specifically with climate change.
That's so cool, Christian, that you have been able to pivot from like such meaningful personal interactions to the totally online platform and still been able to see like some of those benefits and results come through. And I can imagine like, when I was a kid, I probably would have been the one who didn't turn their video on all year. And then finally at the end, like, okay, I'm ready. That's really cool. I would say like my personal measure of success is kind of a mix of both what Richard said and Christian. I like to see that I have the potential to grow. And so like I like my like measurement of success is that I'm being challenged and that I see in the future I can grow into something and like learn something new. But I also really find it important to make sure that I empower other people and other communities. And so, you know, when I was at Middlebury working with Marie Butcher and doing field trips, it was bringing kids to Garland and seeing them get excited about, you know, creek crawling. Or when I was with the Coastal Conservancy, it was, you know, being able to give a small community that had never had climate change incorporated in their long range planning, give them, you know, a little grant where they could start actually getting technical assistance and start thinking about how to prevent the impacts of high heat. And so seeing on the ground projects like come to life and empowering people to figure out how to become more resilient to climate change, that's my success metric.
Great, thank you. I think it's 2:27 right now. I believe this session ends at 2:30. Did anybody have any last minute comments or last minute questions that they wanted to ask or mention?
This has been really fun. Thank you so much for moderating, Joseph, and thanks to all the fellow panelists. It's been awesome sharing perspectives with you.
Yeah, this has been an awesome panel. Thank you for being here. All right, everybody, there is another session right after this one at 2:30, which is the closing ceremonies. If you guys would like to attend that, and that would be awesome. Let me know if, you know what, I'll just do it anyways. I'm gonna drop the link in the chat for you guys to join. And then we hope to see you there.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, everyone. This has been really awesome to be a part of.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
See you
Thank
at the
you, everyone,
closing
who joined.
ceremonies.